Welcome to Hello Therapy, a podcast to help you take charge of your mental health through evidence-based psychological tips and tools straight from the therapy room so that you can live life better. Are you a parent struggling to navigate the complex and often confusing world of teenage emotions and mental health? If this is you, then this episode is a must listen. I am your host, Dr. Liz White, a consultant clinical psychologist, and today I am joined by Dr. Beth Mosley, MBE, a consultant clinical psychologist and mum of three who specialises in children's mental health. Beth is the author of Happy Families, How to Protect and Support Your Child's Mental Health, published throughout the world, and her contribution to children's mental health during the pandemic was recognised in the 2022 New Year's Honours List with an MBE. In this episode, we discuss how to manage the emotional rollercoaster of adolescence. Beth shares her expertise on how to foster independence, handle your reactions as a parent, and support your child through the pressures of exams without overstepping. So whether you're grappling with your teen's emerging independence or simply want to keep the lines of communication open, this episode is packed with insights to help you navigate these challenging yet rewarding years. And for an exclusive mini episode with Dr. Beth and much, much more, don't forget to check out the Hello Therapy Substack. The link is in the show notes. Let's dive in. So, Beth, thank you so much for coming on the Hello Therapy podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
It's really nice to have you here. We are here to talk about teens, parenting teens, teens' mental health. I haven't talked about teenage mental health yet on the podcast, and it's long overdue because I have teenagers. So it'd be great to get your advice on certain things. Do you want to just quickly introduce who you are and what you do?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and I've worked with young people and families for like over 20 years now. I've stopped saying how many years because it feels just too long in mental health services. I'm also an author of a book called Happy Families, How to Protect and Support Your Child's Mental Health, which I've written very much from the perspective of not just a mental health professional, but also a mother. So I have three children who are now 19, 15, and 12. And I'm a single parent as well. So I think some of the additional demands of parenting or co-parenting, so their dad is very much in their life, but we don't live in the same household, adds to some of the challenges of being a parent. So yeah,
for sure.
that's me.
Thank you. So we're going to start with a topic within parenting that cuts across any age child that you have. And it's one thing that I can find quite tricky with my children. And it comes up a lot in the work that I do with clients. So I see adults who are parents. How can parents communicate effectively with their teen? Because it can be a real challenge, can't it, to get through to them, that sort of age-old thing of you ask them how their day was in the car, picking them up from school, and you kind of just get a one-word answer. So, yeah, what would you advise parents listening around that?
Well, I think there's a few important things to know about the adolescent brain and how it's developing, which can help us as parents make a bit more sense of what we often see in our teens. So, firstly, adolescent brains are wired to experience more extreme emotions. So, you might see more extreme highs and lows in your adolescent, and also to be attracted to risk. So they might find a lot of things that they previously enjoyed quite boring. And this is really about the adolescent being prepared to get into the world and be independent of you to take those chances, take those risks, and to be separate from parents. They're also wired to be particularly concerned about fitting in and social status. And really, what their peers are doing is way more important and influential than what you're doing as an adult. And again, that's all about that need to belong in a social group because if you imagine predators in the wild, if you're a herd of antelope and you're a teen antelope, you need to be in with the herd, not on the
Yeah.
periphery, or the lion can pick you off. So when your adolescent is stressed about not fitting in with their peer group, not having the right trainers, for them, it literally feels like a matter of life and death. It's like
Mm.
being outside in the herd. So I think that's really important to know, because it means that the way the adolescent brain is wired is it's much more sensitive to negative social cues. So,
Okay.
how we talk to our adolescents, how our body language is going to have a big impact on how they feel about the communication and how
Hmm.
responsive they're going to be. So, we know, for example, if you show adolescents neutral faces, they tend to see them as aggressive. So
All right.
when you're essentially feeling like you're not being negative or aggressive, quite often your adolescent might see your facial expressions and your tone of voice. They kind of hear it as amplified as negative.
Mm.
And I,
Mhm.
I often have that experience with my teens. So they stop shouting at me. Well, I'm not shouting at me. This is my calm voice. No, it
Yeah.
isn't. It's your angry voice. Or they'll often be very sensitive to any criticism or judgment that comes through, even if I'm
Mm.
not being critical. And I think that's so important to know, because we can often feel like our adolescents are deliberately being difficult or obstructive
Mhm.
with us. Or when actual fact, their brain is just super, super, super sensitive, because they, more than anything, need to fit in socially
Mhm.
in order to be able to essentially survive and thrive. So
Yeah.
knowing that, I think, helps us as parents think more carefully about the way that we're communicating with our teens. So a couple of things that have really helped me when I've been working with my children, not working with my children, but being a parent of my children, but when I've also been advising families
Mhm.
and on this topic, is this idea of manager to coach. So
Okay.
I think when our children are quite young, we're used to managing their lives, we're used to organizing them, packing up their packed lunch, getting them
Yeah.
ready for school. So we're kind of really hands on and doing a lot for them. As our teens go into those young adult years, as they're preparing for adulthood, we often need to move away from providing that really hands on support to being more like a coach. So, if you think
Mhm.
about what a coach does, it's a bit of a cheerleader, it's a bit of a kind of helping a young person do what they need to do, but without doing it for them.
Yeah.
But setting them reminders maybe, or helping them talk through what do they need to do in order to be able
Mhm.
to get to school on time, get their stuff ready. And I know if you've got a young person who might be revising at the moment for their mocks, one of the things that you might need to do as a parent of a teen rather than a parent of a younger child is talk them through or support them talking through what they're doing to help revise for
Mhm.
their different subjects, rather than starting to get a piece of paper out and draw out their revision timetable for them and tell them, I think you should be doing revision
Yeah.
for maths on, for this amount of time on Monday night, whatever it might be. So there's
But it's
something.
so tempting, isn't it, to do that?
It is so tempting to do that, and I think the challenge about moving from manager to coach for us as parents is we often have to let our children make some mistakes. We
Yeah.
see them kind of going into situations where if we were being manager still, we think, well, that problem wouldn't have arisen.
Mhm.
But what we know is that quite often we need to learn through experience, and somebody telling us what will be the consequences if we don't perhaps do the thing that our parent knows that we need to do isn't the same as learning through
Mhm.
experience. And quite often, I think developmentally, it's a really important thing that our teens learn to do certain things for themselves. For me, as a busy parent who works a lot, quite often I expect to want to pick up doing certain things for my children when I'm
Mhm.
available and I'm home. So, making dinner, for example, can often be a way of me showing that I'm a caring parent. But
Yeah.
actually, for my children, they've become quite independent and they're great cooks. for me, they just see it as, well, tonight I want to cook dinner, mum. So let me get on with
Mm.
it. Stop
Mhm.
interfering. So there are
Right.
some things that we do as parents for our teens that we perhaps do as acts of kind of showing that we're care for them and that we're trying to do something practical to show that we still are a parent.
Yeah.
But sometimes unintentionally, that can kind of not give our children the opportunity to develop some of those skills for independence,
Mm.
which will really help them as they go into those kind of young adult years, but also make a valuable contribution to the family. I mean, my kids are now better cooks than me,
Oh,
um,
amazing.
which is fantastic when I've had a long day at work and I come home and my daughter's made, independently made a meal. It's fantastic. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And it makes her feel really great because she's making a contribution to the family. She can
Mhm.
visibly see how delighted I am that I
Yeah.
don't have to worry about dinner when I come in. But that's something I've had to really learn to give up control around
Mm.
because my children are very independent and they don't like me interfering. So during the time of that kind of age 12, 13, I had to step completely out of the kitchen and just let them get on with it, make
Right.
the mistakes, make allow there to be a few disasters, chaos and
Mhm.
mess. But through that process, they then really kind of independently developed the skills and enjoyed doing it actually.
Mm.
And I think there's some part of us when we're in that management role, we might do a bit too much micromanagement
Yeah.
and not allow our children to kind of develop the skills, mess up a bit and realize messing up is a part of learning. It's
Mm.
not a disaster. And so I guess that's one of the things that I've found has really improved my relationship with my teens because what we know about teens is that they like respect, they like to be
Yeah.
treated like equals. They're very sensitive to being talked down to. So
Mhm.
anything we can do which provides us with this opportunity to talk across to them as if they're, or somebody suggested speak to your teen as if they're the most kind of important person in your world, like somebody that you completely revered. And if you
Mhm.
speak to them with that tone of voice and that approach, you'll get a completely different response from them. And actually, it sounds crazy, but I've tried that even when my daughter, for example, has been really rude to me. If I go back in a kind of really respectful way to her, her tone changes.
Mhm.
And I think this can be a real challenge in schools when some children have a good relationship with some teachers. And if you dig into that a little bit, the people my children tend to get on with at school are the teachers who treat them as equals,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
and have that a bit more adult to adult kind of dialogue rather than perhaps teaching talking to them, talking down to them.
Mm.
And I guess the other side of that is if you're going to talk to your children in that or your teens in that way, then you're going to expect a little bit more back from them. You're going to
Mhm.
kind of have expectations around,
Yeah.
wanting them to be able to step up to
Mm.
behaving in a way that kind of earns that respect as well.
Yeah. I mean, I really like the manager to coach analogy, and I'm going to try that. But yeah, when your teen is being rude, or there's a problem that needs to be sorted out, or they haven't done something that they should, or whatever it is, it's a real challenge as a parent when you're feeling frustrated to do what you've suggested there, which is kind of be the calm sort of coach. And I think this links to another question around, as a parent, your children move away from you, don't they? As you said there, it's really important that they develop these skills and be independent, and they move more towards their peer group and away from you. But that can bring up some really difficult feelings, can't it, for a parent? Feelings of rejection, um, or anxiety, fear, and sometimes anger. So, do you have any ideas about how a parent can manage that, especially when you're in a challenging situation with your team where you're having to sort a problem out, but they're just all you're getting back is rudeness? Before we get back to the episode, I have got something really exciting to share: our brand new Substack community. This is a space where you can peek behind the scenes of the podcasting process and have a space to connect with other fans of the show. As a subscriber, you'll get a monthly roundup of all the episodes in that month, plus my thoughts and personal reflections on each one, completely free. But if you want to go deeper, a paid subscription unlocks exclusive perks like never heard before guest mini episodes, subscriber only chats, digital downloads, and even the chance to shape future episodes. If that sounds good to you, head to the Substack link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode.
I think firstly, it's so important to acknowledge that you're never going to get it right every time.
Yeah.
And quite often you're having a really difficult day when your adolescent's having a difficult day. So your response won't be the response you want to give a lot of the time. It will be that kind of frazzled emotional response. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that that's a natural part of being a human being. And we can be really quite self-critical as parents and ourselves and be quite hard on ourselves. And that can drive like a wedge sometimes between us and our adolescent. So just a top tip really is, if you do mess up, and naturally you're going to, and you do kind of find that you're not responding to something in the way that you want to, we talk about striking while the iron is cold. Quite often it's in scenarios where it's the wrong time for us, that we're trying to confront something or deal with something, or it's the wrong time for our young person. We want to address it, but they're just in the middle of something else, or they're just really hungry, or they're really tired, or they're just kind of engrossed in another activity. So something about getting the timing right. And if the timing's wrong for you or your child, and you get it wrong, either they do or you do, it's kind of taking a breather, being willing to say, look, I'm really sorry, this is a bad time for me. You've caught me at a really difficult moment. I'm feeling tired, I'm feeling hungry, and I've had a hard day at work. So how about we talk about this in half an hour? And there's something about teaching our children about, the fact that there are better times for difficult conversations. And how can they get the best out of us? Because my kids have now learned that if they ask me just as I'm going out the door, or when I'm feeling stressed, or when I'm tired, they're not going to get the best outcome for them, because they're normally asking me for something they want. So it's teaching our children about when's the best time for me as a parent to have those conversations. And it's also exploring with our teens, when's the best time for you? Is it, early evening when you come back down after you've dealt with whatever you're dealing with, and you're not in the middle of being on your phone? And we can actually have these conversations and work that out with our teens if we choose the right time to have those conversations, and we're curious and respectful when we do it. So I think that's a really important thing to say. And, not being afraid to say sorry if you get it wrong, because what we're teaching our children is what's going on inside of us and what they see, how the two are connected. And if you do make a mistake in your communication with one another, that it's okay to say sorry and own it. The young people I work with always say, I love it when my parent apologized. I love it when they own the fact they got something not quite right. There's a lot of pride, I think, we have as parents, and a lot of fear about getting things wrong or looking weak by saying sorry. So I think it's important to acknowledge that often adolescents admire us when we're big enough to be able to say sorry and own making a mistake. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, it is so painful. It's sad. It creates fear and anxiety, just like you were saying, when our children are moving away from us and perhaps moving towards things we don't understand, that we're not sure about, another world which is, removed from us. And that sense of withdrawal, not sharing things with us anymore, not wanting to be physically close to us anymore. My youngest son is 12, and I can see him moving away from not wanting to sit right next to me on the sofa anymore, and wanting to have more physical boundaries. And he's my youngest child, and I just feel so sad about that because I do know how that changes, and it can never quite be the same again as when they're little and they
Yeah.
cuddle up to you. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that it is going to create a mix of feelings in us, including anger, particularly when our children push us away when we're dealing with a lot ourselves,
Yeah.
and we're trying to be really considerate and we're trying to be really thoughtful, and we're not getting any of that back from them. And I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is don't take it personally, because it can actually feel really hurtful. Sometimes it can feel
Yeah.
like our children hate us, like they
Mhm.
just don't like us. It can feel like sometimes they're punishing us. They're kind of being cruel almost. They have no care about our
Mm.
internal world when we're really consumed with worrying about their internal world,
Yeah.
and it can feel really unfair. I think it's a very natural developmental stage. It's something our children need to do in order to separate from us and go
Okay.
into the adult world.
Mhm.
So for me, I didn't have it so much with my eldest son. He was a very different personality to my daughter, but my daughter has been so much more difficult to manage this transition
Mhm.
in a relationship, and I think we were on the other side of it. But for about a year, I literally felt like my daughter hated me, and just
Mm.
everything I did was annoying to her. I could never get it right. So I had to work really hard at not taking it personally and not retaliating. I know that sounds so immature, but you can almost find yourself kind of mirroring that behavior back
Yeah.
because you kind of don't know what to do. I think that sense of judgment and criticism that they then can feel back from you can then make that relationship feel more difficult. So the biggest thing that I found helped me through that time was firstly having my friends as my cheerlead, the cheerleader friends in my life, not the
Mm.
friends who make you feel worse and actually go,
Yeah.
oh, well, I've got a perfect relationship with my daughter.
Yeah.
But the friends who kind of get it and can validate
Mhm.
your experience, I think that being able to have those conversations with those people is really helpful because it's really normalizing and validating because it's
Mhm.
you think, well, I look at you and I think you're a great mom. And I think, you know, if you're having a similar experience to me, this isn't just about me getting it wrong
Yeah.
as a mom. I think the other thing that's really helped is putting aside some of my judgments and views of what my child was interested in and taking an active interest in their world, even if to
Mhm.
me it seemed something that I wouldn't be interested in or I was a bit disapproving of, if I'm honest. And I found about remaining curious and open minded about some of the things that my daughter hugely values
Mhm.
has enabled me to break into that world and have
Okay.
conversations about things that matter to her. And then what's happened from that is she's then opened up and shared things about what's going on in that world
Yeah.
in a way that's enabled me to be helpful and have more insight into how challenging some of those difficulties are. And I
Yeah.
think social media is a really big one. If you see your child spending a lot of time online, we might have a tendency to be quite negative about that.
Mhm.
And because we don't want to see our kids spending too much time online because we know it's bad for them and we know it's, unhealthy and all of
Yeah.
those things. So I think taking a bit more interest in how Snapchat works, I mean, sharing Instagram, funny reels, just sending it, it's just a way of staying
Mhm.
connected. And
Yeah.
I think you get into this zone where, as a parent, you're just nagging your teen all the time.
Yeah.
Every interaction is just you telling them about something they should be doing or they haven't done. And it can kind of just make it feel like, it's not a great feeling for you as a parent. That there's no fun in your relationship
No.
anymore. And sometimes actually, the wonderful thing about adolescence is that they often do have a different view of the world and they're often learning about new things and exploring new things, which they can expose you to. And if you've got an open mind, you can have a lot more fun. You can learn a lot from your
Yeah.
teen, even if some of the stuff that they're coming up with seems very different
Mhm.
from your worldview. So I think those things have really helped me during that tricky time. And we've come out the other side, I would say. But it took over a year. And that's a
Yeah,
long time to feel
it
like
is.
every time you say goodnight, one of the things I did every night was just say, "Good night, love you," because I often felt like the door was slammed shut and there was
Mm,
not any sense of wanting me to be in her life. So hard, so painful.
yeah.
And there's something about not giving up, not creating masses of pressure or
Mhm.
guilt trips, being available. Like, I'm in waiting. I'm here when you need
Yeah,
me. And when you come to me, and it might be because something's really tricky, my response to that is going to be so critical to whether you come back again.
yeah,
So going into I told you mode, or I warned you about this, is
yeah,
probably going to make it harder for your teen to think next time something else goes wrong. And
yeah.
I'm making a mistake, I'm not gonna go and tell mom because she's just
Mm,
gonna remind me how
yeah,
I've done something she probably wouldn't have approved of anyway. And that's really hard to do because most of our response as parents is about how much we care
mhm,
and how worried we are and how scared we are of our children getting hurt. And quite often I have to explain that, not just to my children, but when I work with kids in sessions, I have to say, this is not my angry face. You're telling me something
okay.
that's making me feel really worried, and my brain is busy whizzing around and thinking, "How can I help you?" And that's
Mm,
what my face expression is
okay.
doing. It's not because I'm angry, it's not because I'm judging or criticizing you, it's just because I'm worried and I'm trying to work out how
Mm,
to help.
mhm,
I think that broadcasting of what's going on inside of you is so important because otherwise young people will often assume you're angry with them, you're judging them, and you're critical, you're criticizing them in your mind. And I think if we think about that as adults, if you've ever
mhm,
had to tell a friend or someone that you care about what they think, something that you're really ashamed of or you're really struggling with, you are looking for every single cue from them
yeah,
about that reassurance that you don't want to dump me as a friend right now. You don't think I'm a
mhm,
despicable human being. You're looking for compassion, aren't you?
absolutely.
And I think as a parent, we're often feeling masses of compassion and empathy, but it's coming out as anger, rage,
Mm,
or distress. And so I think it's kind of reminding our teens what our intentions are and apologizing if we're getting it wrong, if it doesn't
mhm,
feel like that's what we're trying to do.
yeah. I mean, it's so interesting what you've said throughout that, how teens interpret your facial expressions and how it's probably going to be very different to what you're trying to convey, and to be aware of that. And what you said there is just being able to communicate, just, I'm not angry, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm just sort of busy processing what you're telling me. That's so powerful, isn't it? Because it means that your teen can be validated and not sort of go off in their mind assuming that you're angry when you're just concerned, or you're kind of trying to figure out how to help them in that moment.
And it's often why when you have a discussion with your teen and you're not face to face, it goes a lot better. When you're like
Yeah.
maybe walking along or in a car or you're doing an activity where you're both busy doing something with your hands and not
Mm,
looking at one another, it's
that's so
often
true.
why it goes better because the
Yeah.
intensity of the face
Yeah.
to face often leads to people shutting down because of that overwhelm.
Mm,
So if you kind of know that you want to have a chance to talk about something a bit tricky, then, or, offering to take your child for a lift somewhere. And sometimes I ask, because I take my 12-year-old to football on a Friday night, and I say to him, come off your phone for the car journey if you don't mind. And then it goes quiet for a while and then something sparks up. And it's
mm,
when I have the most interesting conversations with
mm,
him because I haven't really got an agenda and he now knows the routine a little bit. This is
yeah.
time for us to just explore any old thing. It's the same with kind of sitting next to them watching TV together or something of their
Mm,
choice. you're both enjoying something which is light-hearted, hopefully. And then in that space, quite often they'll pipe up with, you know what, this thing happened today, or I'm a bit worried about
Yeah.
this. And you're much more relaxed. You're not, you're kind of sitting next to one another. It might be a bit dark in the room. So you've got a
Mhm.
bit of time to collate
Yeah.
your response. I'd say slowing everything down.
Mhm.
And quite often, if we think about good listening, all it is showing an interest and repeating back what somebody said.
Mhm.
I think as parents, we want to solve the problem, jump to the solution straight
Yeah.
away. And actually, quite often, what our kids need from us is just to feel like they've been listened to and heard. And that is so simple if you think,
Yeah.
if all I do is show that I'm interested and repeat back what they've said to me whilst I'm collecting my thoughts and working out what I need to say or do. Because
Yeah.
sometimes our teens can tell us stuff that's pretty shocking, pretty distressing.
Mhm.
And so if we can just think the best thing I can do right now is just repeat back, and that buys you time. And quite often by doing that, they start to solve the problem themselves.
Yeah.
They start to say, well, maybe what I need to do is, and I've been thinking, and actually you slow everything down. You're not jumping in with solving the problem,
Mhm.
and you're giving them the space to make sense of stuff. And
Yeah.
that's actually a lot easier and less scary than thinking, right, they're telling me something, and I've got to come up with the solution. I've got to come up with the answer, and I've got to solve the problem. Um,
Yeah.
so they'll appreciate that more. And it's a massive relief for you as well as a
Mhm.
parent.
Absolutely. And let's think about mental health in teens now. Because often, yeah, you're not getting much from them and they spend a lot of time in their room or, whatever, on their phones with their friends or gaming or whatever it is. It's difficult, isn't it, to know when they're struggling with something emotionally or with struggling with their mental health. Can you give us some pointers on, I guess, the things to look out for if we feel like our teen might be struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, I think this is so hard, isn't it? Because some of the things that we associate with our children being less happy or that we might, when we might be worrying about them, are what we see more of in adolescents, like you said, spending more time in their room. And I think this is a really tricky one for this generation of parents is
Yeah.
how much time our children want to spend in their room because they've got their own entertainment. They've got who knows how
Yeah.
many friends potentially in their room through their
Yeah.
phone. So it's kind of really hard to judge how happy is my child in their room, what are they
Yeah.
actually doing, what are they doing online. So I think some of the key things really, when we notice that our child's sleep or eating seems to have changed, and again,
Mm.
that can be difficult with teens and
Mm.
sleep particularly, we might not know that they've been up till 2 in the
Yeah.
morning or they're really struggling to get to sleep at night. So just kind of making that a conversation point
Mhm.
sometimes I'm really open when I've had a difficult night's sleep because sleep has such a big impact on how we can cope with stress,
Yeah.
how we learn, how we can kind of keep things in proportion. And for a lot of kids, if they're awake in the night because they're feeling anxious or low, they will go online. And that's a
Mm.
time when they could be then accessing stuff that, you've got no idea about. They will
Yeah.
reach out for help online, but they can easily get to stuff that's less helpful as well. So kind of just keeping those conversations open without judgment, because I think we can often be quite judgy as parents about, well, you need to get to bed. Oh, you're on your phone again.
Yeah.
You've got to get a decent night's sleep or you're going to not pass your exams. We kind of
Yeah.
get into that narrative, don't we? So if we turn it into a bit more of a shared problem rather than you need to do this, that, and the other to make sure
Mm.
you get a good night's sleep,
Yeah.
I think that can help them be more open about what might be going on for them around sleep. The other thing is loss of interest in things that they might have previously really
Okay.
enjoyed. So if it's hanging out with friends or if it's an activity they previously enjoyed, just seeing that they're not doing that thing anymore
Mhm.
or they're not getting that kind of enjoyment out of it anymore. So noticing your child's world getting smaller, I would say,
Okay.
is one of the big things because what typically, anxiety or low mood or depression does is it makes you disengage with your
Mm.
world. It
Yeah.
makes you less likely to go and hang out with your friends. It makes you less likely to be at school, been able to learn, it makes you more likely to become more isolated, really. So looking out for not doing some of those activities that they might have done before, and just that kind of apathy, or
Yeah.
I mean, some adolescents are very good at hiding their anxiety and their
Mhm.
stress. And I think that goes back to, let's not kind of, we use the word pathologize a lot. Let's not make our children feel like there's something wrong with them if they're struggling with feeling stressed or
Yeah.
anxious or feeling low. Quite often, those feelings are reflecting something that's going on in their world. Perhaps they've
Mhm.
had a breakdown with a relationship with a really good friend. Perhaps you're going through a difficult
Yeah.
situation as parents, or you've had a loss in the family, or there's some significant changes. And our emotions are really good indicators of what's going on in our external world that's important to us.
Mm.
So I think if you know there's some stuff going on at home, or you know that your child is particularly struggling with a transition or a change at school or with relationships with friends, you can kind of expect that they're just going to create some stress and anxiety or some low
Yeah.
mood. And that's okay. That's a clue, that's an indicator that things aren't quite
Mhm.
right. And that young person needs some help with kind of solving or resolving that challenge,
Yeah.
or processing a loss,
Mm.
which might take time. So there's something about kind of just keeping curious and not
Yeah.
panicking if you're seeing a change, and kind of, it's a bit like an iceberg, what you're seeing on the tip, which can often be quite confrontational as well. You
Mhm.
might see somebody who's slamming the door and, shouting, or getting cross,
Yeah.
really, really irritable, really easy. Underneath that could be sitting lots of worries and anxieties and things that they feel like they've not been able to talk to anyone about. And if they were able to have that conversation with you, you might be, through that conversation, able to say, gosh, that makes sense. Your best
Yeah.
friend and you have been best friends for years, and she's got a boyfriend, and all of a
Mhm.
sudden you don't feel like she cares about you anymore. So that really makes sense to me. And then, instead of your teen thinking, god, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken,
Yeah.
they can think, oh, this makes sense, because I
Yeah.
care about friendship, I care about loyalty. So it can help, really. And that's a lot of what I do as a psychologist, is having those
Mhm.
conversations with young people to say, how you're feeling makes complete sense.
Yeah.
And they're so relieved. Oh, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was broken.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, you're a human being. This is
Yeah.
completely what I'd hope that you'd be feeling. It's hard. It's not nice, but it's a natural part of making sense of what's going on in your life right now.
Mm. Mhm. And obviously, one of the things that is really difficult for teenagers is exams, isn't it? And we're recording this. I said, my child started his mocks today. Do you have any practical tips for parents supporting their teen, and whether it's GCSEs or A levels or something else? We've talked a bit about I guess not being the helicopter parent that, or the sort of micromanager, but any other sort of tips? Because I think the thing that I find challenging, well, I think the main thing that I find challenging is leaving him to it and trusting that he does have skills and that the school are kind of helping him with the revision as well. And because every time I say, can I help? Like, can I test you on your Spanish verbs or whatever it is? No, mum, I don't need you to do that. So yeah, it's that kind of stepping back and, I'm here if you need me kind of thing. But is there anything else that might help parents in supporting their teen?
And I think it's really difficult. I've spoken to teens. I've done a podcast on this with a group of teenagers, who are now young adults, saying, what would you have liked your parent to have done less of or more of? And it was really interesting, because there's a mixture of, well, we want them to actually kick us up the bum and make sure we're doing
Okay.
work sometimes, but we also want them to not put the pressure on us. And it was like, oh gosh, this is really difficult, because you basically
Yeah.
kind of, it's very hard. But what they were sort of saying was they wanted boundaries to
Okay.
support them with good habits. So I guess we know things like sleep and what we're eating
Yeah.
massively impact on our ability to learn. So supporting them to, practically with what can I do to make sure you're getting the food you need, like the food mood roller coaster. I talk about that in my book. Quite often we are going to be at our best when we have got the right amount of food in us. So helping them be more aware of that and making sure you've got the right sorts of snacks in that will kind of
Okay.
help them. Reminding them that sleeping is better than staying up all night revising. And quite often young people are using caffeine to help them during revision season. And it's really difficult because if they start going and buying an energy drink, you don't want to be that nagging parent. Don't do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just making them aware that if they do rely on caffeinated drinks, that is probably going to have kind of an impact on their ability to sleep. So if they're going to do that as early in the day as possible rather than late
Yeah.
at night. I think reminding them how important physical activity is, because for some young people who are quite anxious and preoccupied with revising, they can get into a zone where they are just in their room revising,
Yeah.
revising. And what we know is that if you do short bursts of physical activity, that actually improves the amount of oxygen that's getting to your brain. It improves your cell regeneration in your brain.
Yeah.
So it's so important to just, even if you're going to get up and dance around your room or going to go outside and have a blast, just quick 5-minute walk, just having those consistent breaks really does make a difference, particularly for a young person who's feeling stressed, but also for a young person who's got no motivation and is feeling really kind of struggling. Talk about kind of like the window of tolerance, and kids who
Yeah.
perhaps are understimulated need to do things to get them in the zone, which are often listening to loud music, jumping up and about,
Yeah.
doing some physical activity. So whether you are struggling with being overstressed or under stressed,
Yeah.
doing physical activity is such an important thing. So offering to do something with them. So my daughter loves going to the gym. So sometimes it's really inconvenient for me, but I will prioritize helping that happen.
Okay.
And maybe making a bit of a routine with them. So Monday night and Wednesday night, I'm finishing at work at this time. I'll take you to the gym at this time, so that you're kind of helping them, making it easier for them to do the things that are good for them. And social connection again is critical. So if you can support them doing revision with a peer,
Okay.
so that they kind of not in isolation all of the time. Because that's another thing for kids who are particularly anxious, they can opt out of all social activities. Probably less so for those young people who are less anxious, but it's just reminding them that's really important to recharge your battery. So almost working out of your adolescent, what are the things that recharge your batteries, and how do we make sure that you've got them throughout the revision time? And then I guess don't nag. Instead of
Okay.
nagging, say, what's your plan? And then they
Okay.
can articulate what's your plan. So it sounds like, you want to help your son revise with this for Spanish verbs, but you can say, okay, what's your plan around
Yeah.
revising for Spanish? And then he'll probably tell you, and you'll be like, oh, okay, you're doing a great job on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you might notice a massive flaw in his plan, and you can be curious again. So how are you going to deal with the fact on Sunday, we're going somewhere
Yeah.
for the day, and actually you're going to have not as much time as you thought?
Mhm.
And don't catastrophize, because I think we can get into quite heightened, especially if we think our children aren't doing enough of something. We can get into the zone of, if you don't do this, then this, that, and the other's going to happen, and your whole future's going to implode.
Yeah.
And if we can try and avoid doing that, I think it's really important, because when results days come and your child hasn't done as well, you will regret saying all of that, because you'll be in the zone of going, well, it's not so bad, really.
Yeah.
And I think, quite often a lot of young people who maybe didn't put in the effort in their GCSE year go into their A level or college years, and they know, you know what, I didn't get the grades I should have got because I didn't put in enough effort. So I am going to work a lot harder in my A levels. So again, it goes back to there is a degree of you need to allow your child to work out for
Right.
themselves. And I think I know my son didn't do as well in his A levels as he hoped, and he has gone to university with so much drive to
Yeah.
demonstrate that actually he can do better than those grades he got at A level.
Hmm.
And I know my daughter's not going to do as well as her GCSEs this year. And I think it's going to disappoint her, but make her realize that actually, if she does want to do better and have that feeling of, you know, being proud of what she's achieved,
Mm.
putting in the work will
Yeah.
definitely result in, a better outcome.
Yeah.
So, and I think once your kids get to A levels or college or whatever they're going to do, and they're doing their chosen subject, they quite often have a completely different approach to it
Hmm.
because they're learning something that they've chosen to learn, and they're not doing so many topics that they're perhaps less engaged with. So I think it's just important to hold those things in mind.
Okay.
This is all part of the learning experience. This isn't the definitive moment of your young person's
Yeah.
life. It's learning about learning, really. And it is a process that's going to take place over a number of years. So don't panic, really, I'd
Hmm.
say.
Yeah. There have been so many great nuggets from this podcast, and your book is brilliant. I've read it, and there's so many sort of useful tips for parents of all ages, but particularly teens, I think. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
You're welcome. And I think the 6 communication hacks are
Hmm.
so helpful
Okay.
because they're so practical. So they're obviously covered in it. There's a chapter of the book that just covers them.
Yeah.
And they're so useful, not just with children, but they're useful for
Yeah.
other adults too. Um, so I think that's the important thing to remember, that most of the things that I cover in the book of anxiety, low mood, they
Hmm.
are relevant to adults too.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not just what you do for children, and that's completely separate. It's really
Hmm.
helpful for yourself, but also for other people in your life who might be struggling with low mood or anxiety. So I think it's
Yeah.
important to hold on to that.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Hello Therapy. If you found it helpful, don't forget to subscribe, follow, and review. You can get more well-being and mental health tips by joining our email list and visiting the resources section of our website at harleyclinical.co.uk. The Hello Therapy podcast and the information provided by me, Dr. Liz White, is solely intended for information and educational purposes and does not constitute personalised advice. Please do reach out to your GP or a mental health professional if you need support. Until next time, take care of yourself.